With Andrea Berta finally joining Arsenal being confirmed by the club, it is now time to talk about transfer news again, with big reports that Arsenal want to sign Viktor Gyökeres in the summer already emerging. In this video, we're going to talk about everything we've heard and about the player himself and what potentially could happen in the future. So let's get into it. Now, like many of you, this news really came as a surprise, I think, to all Arsenal supporters. It was reported by David Ornstein, who of course is probably the most reliable person in the scene, that Arsenal and Andrea Berta, more importantly, have their eyes on Viktor Gyökeres to lead their line in the summer transfer target. Now, obviously in this report, it also says that Alexander Isak is the main target, and I think that has been reported by many people now, so we all know that. But it's seen that Viktor Gyökeres could be a cheaper option that could also offer Arsenal really end product right now, which I do think is interesting. Now, straight away off the bat, my opinion of this is very indifferent. I've gone over Viktor Gyökeres years ago now when Arsenal were first linked with him, and at the time I think I was very excited about the prospect of getting someone that has scored the many goals as he has in. Now, I think my adjustment over the time has kind of changed, and I do still think that I would rather, obviously, Alexander Isak, the number one target everyone wants, but even if he's not likely, I would still rather Arsenal get Benjamin Šeško, but I'm open to other criticisms and ideas, and I do think Viktor Gyökeres isn't as bad as everyone makes out to be. Now, the reason why I say this is because Viktor Gyökeres, you look at his goal tally, it is probably the best from the Portuguese league we have ever seen. Now, the problem about that is that it is one of them, the Portuguese league. Not a league I think necessarily translates well brilliantly to the Premier League, especially with attackers, but it has done in the past. It kind of is give or take. You think about Bruno Fernandes, brilliant player, and even Darwin Núñez. I know for the money that they spent, Liverpool definitely not worth that amount of money, but that was a lot because of potential and age, and everyone knew he was a little bit raw. And I still think overall Darwin Núñez is a decent player, probably not playing at the best club for him, but also you have to take a pinch of salt with some of the stats that he had. And Gyökeres is someone that has brilliant stats, but obviously not having that same sort of tally. He isn't scoring 5 goals against 9 players and half of them are goalkeepers. He is playing against actual Portuguese teams that have 11 players and scoring all the time. Now, first of all, I want to talk about why do I think Arsenal might be looking at Gyökeres. Now, I think it definitely comes from that end product standpoint. I think when Andrea Berta has come in, we've all spoken about it, but it looks like it's going to be a win now sort of mentality. He buys players that he wants now win. He doesn't really think about the future too much, especially when it comes to the situation that Arsenal are in. And the reason why he was brought in is because Mikel Arteta wanted him in, more importantly, but it's also a partnership. He is allowed to have wiggle room to make signings that he wants, and Arteta isn't always going to agree with them. You even see that in the report that The Athletic made about that. Now, obviously, I think all of that is great. I think that's what we've needed for a long time. We need different opinions in the room, and Arteta can't always be king, especially when some of the players he ends up taking months to get aren't really going to change the trajectory of the club, like Mikel Merino, who is good but isn't obviously a starter. Now, this is why I was a little bit suspect about the links coming out anyway. If Arsenal aren't in a win now sort of mentality and want to bring players in, it obviously makes sense to want to get Alexander Isak, but we all know 140 mil for Alexander Isak, which is probably how much it's going to cost, is going to be a little steep even for the club right now. There's a lot of other positions we need to sort out. I think we need to buy a few midfielders, a defender, a goalkeeper, a winger, potentially another winger. So obviously just buying that amount of money for a striker I think is a little steep, and I think we've got more of the squad to focus on. Now, I think the club know this as well, and I don't think this is going to be alarming news to them, which I do think is one of the reasons why Gyökeres is even looked at in the first place. I made a video about the 3 players I think are the most similar to Isak and probably fit our style, being obviously Benjamin Šeško, Isak and Ekitike, and I do think since then I think Šeško is that number 1 target I would want, because he costs a third less than Isak as a whole, is young, wants to come to the team, and obviously his physical attributes, being 6'5", pretty decently strong, having a brilliant ball striking ability which we need, I think can develop into a top player. Now, the thing is with Šeško though, it doesn't mean he's going to be this brilliant straight away. Like, I do think there's going to be a level of him scoring 15 maybe goals next season in all competitions. He probably won't blow up the goal scoring chance and maybe won't be a brilliant help for us overall, but in the 2 years time he'll be that 150 mil striker. That is the thought, and sometimes I think Arsenal need to get in early, especially in a striker market which is very light I think overall. Now, this is the thing with Viktor Gyökeres. We know Gyökeres is going to cost around the same amount of money. Sporting have spoke about how he's been able to leave this summer for around 60 to 70 million euros, I think, overall. And there's obviously going to be a lot of teams interested in him that aren't Arsenal's level. I think more likely United, Chelsea, these sort of teams will probably want him. And I do think, other than if you're talking about money, which Arsenal can offer, I do think Arsenal realistically are the best place to go, not being biased for them players. Now, this is the thing with Gyökeres though. Obviously, his goal tally is quite dreamy when you look at it. It's a brilliant level, and obviously you've got to take into consideration the league as well. But how he plays, I think, would be an interesting thing within the team. Now, he is what I like to say a little bit more transitional. All the goals he pretty much just scores for Sporting is when they are very deep, they're in a low to mid block, and then they can get out with Gyökeres being that main person within space to crush at one-on-one defenders and smash balls in. He's so good in even one-on-ones, one-on-twos in area that there's space in. And I will say, out of any of the other players we're talking about, like Šeško or Ekitike, he is definitely a much better finisher. This guy is obviously a lot older at 26, but he definitely has a lot more of a variance of shots, and his power that he gets around them is incredible. That one he had against us where he nearly scored was insane. Now, I do think there's a certain level of his physicality is good enough to play in the Prem. He's a big guy. I do think that he isn't as good in the air as probably people like Šeško, but Arsenal, are we going to really move into that? Well, we do, but maybe want to change. But I do think Gyökeres kind of shows me that Arsenal, if we do get him, bear in mind, we might change our style a little bit. Now, something I've been talking about in a lot of my Man City videos, if you've watched them, is that Man City are clearly trying to change it to a more transitional base side. They've got a big striker, they've got a small one with Marmoush coming inside from the left usually. And what the point of it is Ederson kicks the ball long. Man City bait a lot of the players deeper, so they try to have the other team, if they're pressing high, they will be on that halfway line, and they try and isolate one of the players with their striker, making sure that Haaland can even bully the player and get through one-on-one, or let him be a bit of a decoy and head the ball down to Marmoush who can run through. Now, in order to do this, you need big players, you need fast players, and you need space, and Arsenal at the moment don't really have any of that. We haven't got quick players. We do have big players, but they're not exactly active big players. You're not going to see Marino making runs in behind. You will see Havertz, but he's not necessarily like a power, like driven runner. He's much more articulate and he's better in the box. And Arsenal, majority at home at least, play against lower to mid blocks because we struggle to get past them, and we don't really have that transitional base speed. I know that we have won the ball back from high turnovers a lot this season and not capitulated on that, which is something we need to improve. But Gyökeres would be great in them areas, but is that really the way that Arsenal play overall? Now, this makes me think that Arsenal might change into a little bit more transitional base side. We've seen us launch it a lot more than other teams this season with David Rice, and maybe that's something going forward. And even for people like Gabriel's long passing has been improved. Even Rice is definitely long passing, has been a lot more catered for, I think, in times this season. So I do think there's a certain level of that as well with Arsenal, which is going to be interesting. Now, let's say that Arsenal sign Nico Williams as a left winger, because I think at the moment that's probably the most likely one. He would also benefit from these transitional base areas. He would also benefit from space. And I do think there's a certain level of buying these players in would actually just give you more space. It will allow Arsenal to come deeper, bait presses in, I think, a little bit more, and then play it over the top, which would make Arsenal even a little bit more threatening in these areas where teams would want to back off, which would give us that space in front of them at least. Another thing with Gyökeres as well is that he loves building up on that left side. He mostly comes over to it. He mostly does a lot of his runs that side as well. And I'm not sure with Nico Williams wanting them same sort of areas how that's going to work on the counter attack, but that also could work if Nico Williams wanted to come inside and they could switch within games, which I've also seen Alexander Isak be a big person that does that for Newcastle. So Arsenal might turn into this transitional based side that Gyökeres can really thrive in. Now, I still have my qualms about it because we haven't seen Arteta really want to be like that ever. He is a conservative manager, likes having control of the ball. I don't know if he would want to give up that amount of control on the pitch in order to have some chances to go long. It's definitely a good plan B, but is Gyökeres being the main striker really going to be worth it for now? And that is definitely something to think about. And there is certain levels of respect there. It's coming in that Andrea Berta wants the player over Arteta, but we have seen Arteta respect him. When we played against them, they put Saliba and Gabriel on Gyökeres when he was up front by himself, which they only really do against like Haaland and him and big strikers like that who are so effective. And I do think if you want someone that's probably the most similar to Haaland in the world right now, it's probably Gyökeres through some of their little abilities. Now, he's a lot, I think, more willing to be on the ball, but some games he might not touch it, which could also be a concern, but Arsenal don't worry and don't really fret with progression, which is something very interesting. He's also a very good player to play off of. He can have players running behind of him, so if you are going to sign Nico Williams and have Saka on the right, he can definitely hold the ball up and put the ball through for them as well, and then get into good areas in the box, and he is very quick as well. So I do think from a tactical level it would make a lot of sense, but Arsenal would have to switch their system a little bit. We can't have continuing pressure in the whole game, and ultimately, realistically, what you've got to think about is if Arsenal are trying to reach an end game or reach an end point where we can really be effective, I do think this would solve a lot of issues against their mid blocks that we have continually have problems with, and it would at least worry teams into different areas. His ability to have great ball striking ability from outside the box is something that I think Šeško would have as well, but this is something that Arsenal need. Not only just because we need someone to be able to score from outside the box that isn't a child, but it's just the fact that it worries teams. If you have a player that can shoot from outside the box, they will press you a lot more. Teams will come towards you. They will have to move from their block. This will allow players to get in and run in behind or make them sort of runs into that space they've vacated. And as soon as you have that threat in other ways than just crossing the ball in or just being a team that have to play through a team from the wing, then you become a lot more of a complete team, and teams in low blocks to mid blocks have more to worry about, so they have to come out of that press. Now I think our striker a lot of the time is going to defend on the winger that we buy as well. Now looking at the wingers that we're linked to, Nico Williams, Semenyo, they are creative wingers, which is something we need, that can cross and be very good one-on-one, but also very good in space. And I do think when you cater towards them sort of players, then the striker doesn't really matter, because I think all the ones we're linked are fine. But Gyökeres is a very different person. I expect if he does join Arsenal, end result product right now, if he isn't scoring 20 goals next season, okay, barring give some injuries, I'll let off, but let's say he's playing every single game next season and he isn't scoring 20 goals, that would be a big disappointment. He has to hit the ground running given his age and given the amount of time Arsenal really have. And if we are going for a win now player up front, then I expect a little project winger like Nico Williams, who is still quite raw, to probably be someone we expect to get, because I've heard a lot of people say they want one at least win now player, and I guess Gyökeres is that man, which I'm not against in that sort of metric. Overall, Gyökeres is probably one of the most confusing players that you will see, because as much as I do think he's underrated between Arsenal fans, I also completely get it. I have worried about his goal tally being against the sort of teams that he plays against and the space that he gets, considering a lot of them are like Farmer League. But he also has done a lot in Europe. I watched the game against Leipzig when he played against Šeško, and his transitional capabilities are incredible. He can literally take on teams by himself, and he can also finish in pretty much anywhere within the box, which I don't think is just miraculously going to disappear when you get to a better league. Them sort of things will stay the same, especially if you have the physical and capabilities to run in behind, which I do think he has. But I will say that it is a massive gamble to spend 60 mil on Gyökeres for now and not look at someone like Šeško, who I know obviously we're looking at, but I mean if we don't get, is a big risk. Šeško in 2 years time could be that striker that everyone's looking at, who's worth 140 to 150 mil, and if we haven't won the league in 2 years time and Gyökeres is even older, will we be in a situation where that is a complete mistake? And I do think we have to take risks. I have had said this in the past, so I'm not going to be against if we take a risk like this in the transfer market, but it is definitely something to think about. I want Arsenal to win the league within the next 2 years. I think that's a relatively honest and quite normal prediction and expectation to have within this squad. And Andrea Berta coming in, if he wants this man, if he's really convinced, then we've got to listen to him at least. Not maybe buy him, but he's got to be in the consideration, which we haven't seen before. And usually I don't talk about links all the time, but obviously come from David Ornstein, this is a main one, and it's literally on the same day Andrea Berta finally got announced, which means something must be brewing. He has come in and said he wants these players, and now we will look to see what we can do. If you're looking for a major concern, like one big one, I would say that the fact that he hasn't really played against many low blocks is quite concerning, but it's that certain thing that I spoke about in this video. If you have these abilities in front of the block, that maybe they would have to be pulled out, and if you have Nico Williams and Saka on the wings, let's say, they will create so much and be able to be so effective at pulling players away from them central areas where maybe teams won't always be in a low block. Teams will be really struggling and getting pushed around a little bit, and even with his height and physicality, you expect him to be decent enough in the air, in the box, to actually score and get on the end of things, and his awareness in the box is a very key part of his game. Now if you want to see a complete tactical analysis of him, I have videos on them, so I will link one up right now, so please go and watch that. But obviously that was a long time ago, so we might have to do a new one in the next few months. But thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.